Welcome back, minors. My name is Amber Johnston. I'm a counselor for student well-being.
And I'm Tracy Kriegel, and I'm a counselor for student well-being. It's time for your morning cup of joe.
Well, today I wanted to talk about a serious topic, and that's intimate partner violence. And in order to illustrate the concept, I'm going to cover an extremely popular book series. And at the time that I'm writing this, or that I recorded this, the book, the second book in the series, is actually number 4 on the New York Times bestseller list. The book series is called It Ends With Us, and it took over BookTube and BookTok, which is the YouTube for book lovers, readers, and the TikTok for book lovers and readers, which is how I initially became aware of it.
Okay.
Um, and for some time, it's just kind of totally dominated those, and it remains popular recommendation for most book clubs to this day. There's been a lot of criticism about this book series, that it romances the topic of abuse and intimate partner violence. But I think that has more to do with how it was marketed. And as it was initially marketed as a romance novel, and thus the domestic violence aspect of it was a bit of a shock for those who were unprepared. I took away from this book that it was supposed to make you feel what it's like to be in an abusive relationship.
Got it.
And this book is very intense read, and it's to the point that it's almost uncomfortable book to read at times. So if you are a victim of domestic violence or sexual assault, this may be a book that's uncomfortable for you. And we are not going to talk about any details of any of the instances that happened, just overriding themes.
Okay, so a content warning has been given. If this is too much, you may not want to listen to this podcast. But obviously, if it does at any time elicit, difficulties for you, feel free to turn the podcast off. Or if you need to process any of that, don't hesitate to call over to Student Wellbeing, and we'll be glad to chat with you in regards to, the topics that were addressed today.
And again, we're not going to go into any details regarding the sexual assaults that happen in this book or any of the individual domestic violence scenes that happen. Again, this is going to primarily be about themes, but if you are made uncomfortable by anything that's in this podcast, please feel free to reach out for some assistance, turn the podcast off. We'd be more than happy to process through it with you.
Absolutely.
So unlike our usual efforts, that there will be some spoilers, but it will be within what we're talking about, which is specifically the cycle of domestic violence and the cycle of abuse. I will not spoil the ending to this book, and thus I will not be talking about anything about the second book. It Starts With Us. And I will be talking only about the major instances of intimate partner violence in the background books, characters of the book. And so this might also, for those of you who plan to read it, it might help ease some of that shock value for those parts of the book, because you'll kind of know that they're coming, and may make it a little easier. So buckle up. This is going to be a bit long of a podcast.
Well, that being said, Amber, sometimes our podcasts do get long.
This one's going to be long because there's a lot to cover. And this is a very serious topic. It's a very serious one. So when you first look at the book, It Ends With Us, it seems to be your run-of-the-mill contemporary romance novel. It's bubblegum pink. It's covered in flowers, and it opens with, like, the storyline opens with this beautiful 20-something-year-old protagonist, and her name is Lily Bloom. It's got that sickeningly sweet Harlequin romance feel to the name. And she's sitting on the roof of a building at her after her father's funeral, and it feels like your run-of-the-mill, like, normal romance, contemporary romance. And so while she's sitting there, this stunningly handsome man comes up to the roof and proceeds to beat a very large marine grade polymer chair. And the author very much makes a point that it's a marine grade polymer. And reading that was interesting because marine grade polymer is very hard to destroy. So if you're reading a book and looking back on it, know that the book is about domestic violence. And the first introduction of the guy is he comes up and he's angry and he's beating an indestructible chair. It feels like there's a symbolism there and metaphor there, doesn't it?
Very hard man.
Yeah. Yes. But the chair is sturdy, so it's not harmed by the beating. Of course, it's marine grade polymer. And so after this whole situation happens, Lily and this guy, his name's Ryle, she finds out he's a neurosurgeon, and they start talking, and the conversation gets pretty spicy at this point, and they part ways and don't expect to see each other ever again. And then 6 months later, they meet up, and there's a huge, tremendous buildup. They start dating. It is over the top romantic, absolutely huge buildup, a huge romance. It's this at this point is again standard contemporary romance novel. And so then all of a sudden the day's getting, the book's getting steamier and steamier, and all of a sudden there is a scene that's set out to be a romantic night between the two of them. And Lily makes dinner, and they're both a little drunk, and he goes to take the dinner out of the oven and forgets to use the pot holder, and he burns himself. She laughs, and then he pushes her, and she ends up hitting her head on a cabinet and cuts her head. And he comes back and he apologizes. He blames it on shock. He goes on blaming it on the fact that his hands were hurt and his hands were his career. He blames the alcohol, and of course she forgives him. Oh yeah, we were a little drunk, blah 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 blah, and figures it's not going to happen again. And the next time he ends up shoving her while she's on the stairs, and she falls down the stairs. And it's all because he found her high school ex-boyfriend's phone number in her phone case.
That's totally unexcusable. Total overkill, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And the whole reason that the ex-boyfriend's phone number ended up in her phone case is because he saw the black eye after the first incident. He saw her in public, saw that she had the black eye, gave her the phone number, she put the phone in and forgot it was there.
Oh, gotcha.
And so he was snooping through her stuff. He finds the phone number, and then he shoves her down the stairs.
Wow.
Right. So the next time he tries to sexually assault her because he found a magnet.
Magnet?
That somebody had given her. An ex had given her a magnet.
A magnet? What did the magnet have on it?
It was just talking about everything's better in Boston.
Oh.
That's it.
Total overreaction?
Yes. Yeah. And he ended up biting her during this assault to the point that she had to have stitches.
Oh my goodness.
And so what is this, when we talked about this, what does this tell us about intimate partner violence? Listening to the cycle that I just talked about. Because after each time that he would assault her, he would come back and he would apologize, and he would say, I just love you so much, and I get so upset, and I was drunk, I was this, I was that. There was always excuses. So let's kind of go back a little bit. Knowing what you know about the cycle of domestic violence, what do you think, predictions could you make about Lily's past?
There's probably abuse in her past.
Right. And that's kind of how the cycle goes. And domestic violence and substance use actually can share the same pattern. So that means that if somebody was grown up in a home where there was substance use, they may end up becoming a victim of or a survivor of domestic violence in their later years, or vice versa, because the patterns overlap each other. But Lily's mom in this is actually a domestic violence survivor. And so survivors of childhood abuse who grow up witnessing witnessing intimate partner violence are more likely to become victims again themselves in future relationships. They're more likely to become perpetrators also, but it doesn't always become intimate partner violence. They could develop a substance use problem. They could, but they're closely related. And then you have, what would you think about Ryle, the man who's...
I would say probably he's endured some sort of intense trauma himself. Some sort of maybe adverse childhood event.
Right. Or he could have also been a victim of domestic violence himself.
Yeah.
So for Ryle himself, he experienced an intense trauma, and he's unwilling to seek therapy for it. Like he just tries to stuff it down and doesn't want to talk about it. So this causes him to have uncontrollable rages, according to him. Like that's what he says. I have these rages, I can't control them. Just like in a real domestic violence case, he's suddenly able to conveniently control them when he's in the presence of other people that could negatively impact them. The only times that he's quote, quote, unable to control them is around people that are weaker than him or those he has power over. Which you see very much with Ryle. There's a few situations in the book where he's around his mother, around other adults, and Lily does things intentionally that she knows are going to make him mad, that she wouldn't have the courage to do without having those people there, but she's able to do those things because she knows he is not going to harm her because those other people are present.
Gotcha.
And his beating of the chair kind of struck me, like I mentioned this earlier, it kind of struck me as symbolic, because his beating of the chair, which he makes, is like, the author makes this point heavily that this chair is indestructible. And there's a parallel between her thinking that this was not someone who'd be in the situation, like Lily thinking that she would never be in a DV situation because her father was a abuser. And so therefore she's unbreakable. So she kept thinking she would see it and that she would be able to spot the problems. But she wasn't. And she didn't, because she hadn't healed from her trauma.
She didn't see the warning signs.
Yeah, she didn't get the warning signs. And here's the thing is, even reading the book, the way that Colleen Hoover wrote the book makes it very difficult. Like, it blindsided me, and I'm a therapist. Like, completely. Like, and because I didn't read any spoilers, like, I just knew everybody was talking about this book. So I wanted to go into, I'm a big reader. So I went in heavily, like, thinking this was a romance novel, but a lot of romance novels have a lot of toxic things in them, elements, if that makes sense, in their relationships. I was totally not expecting for it to get violent. It really threw me for a loop.
Well, and I think that happens in real life. Nobody expects a relationship to get violent.
Right.
They don't go into a relationship thinking, oh, this guy's going to hurt me or this girl's going to hurt me. They go into the relationship thinking this is going to be a great relationship, and they hope that the relationship's going to be good, and then all of a sudden, just like what you're explaining in this situation, it happens and it turns not for like it was supposed to be. And
right.
Yeah.
Well, it never starts out, people are like, how do you end up in a situation like that? And it never starts that way. It starts as just saying negative things or putting somebody down, or it might start as a little shove, that's not even something that hurts. And then eventually over time is when it builds and it gets worse and worse and worse, because it does. Domestic violence always escalates.
Right.
It's just how far is it going to escalate before you do something.
Right, exactly.
So let's talk about some of the characteristics that we've got that of domestic violence relationships or intimate partner violence situations. So abusive relationships feel very intense at first. So if that's why individuals who grew up in households that had a lot of domestic violence, and then may feel that a normal, healthy relationship may feel a little bit boring to them, and not as exciting because they're used to those constant highs and lows. So it can be a little bit like difficult, and usually it's one of the things we have to address in therapy. So let's talk about some of the problematic behaviors he did. First, Ryle pressures Lily to have sex with him. He shows up at her door and literally gets on his hands and knees and begs her. This in the book is made out to be cutesy and romantic, and oh look, this cute guy is begging, to have a sexual relationship with her, and it's supposed to be romantic. But what do you think?
It was his way of exerting control.
Right.
That was that kind of like that boundary he was pushing. He was pushing the boundary. And in the way, I'm sure the way the book was making it sound was it was like he was being cute and romanticizing the situation. But when you have somebody who wants to be in control of the situation, they will just push the boundary and keep pushing the boundary till they get their way.
Yes.
And that's exerting control.
And that's exactly what he does. Mm-hmm. And he refuses to go away. Like, she tells him that she doesn't want to sleep with him because he doesn't want a serious relationship with her at first. He just wants to sleep with her and leave her. And she's like, I don't want that. That's not what I want. But he keeps pressuring it, like highly pressuring her, going to her house, showing up at her doorstep, cornering her at parties. Like, that's abusive behavior. Like, in a
Stalking.
book. It absolutely, like in a book, okay, that's cutesy, but in real life, if somebody's doing that, that is very problematic. Big honking red flag there.
Yes, big red flags. If that was to happen here on campus, that would be
Title IX.
Well, at first I think it would be called UPD.
Yeah.
If you have the what is the Rave Guardian app, I would be texting UPD and saying, "Hey, this guy's doing this.
Yeah.
This girl is doing this. Alone. These people need to leave me alone because this is not kosher." And that's not that you have to say yes to the person because the pressure keeps happening. That's call someone and say, "Hey, this is going on."
Right.
And this is making me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. No means no.
No means no.
So if her saying no should have been the end of that discussion.
Absolutely.
Once the relationship begins, like once they actually start dating, he makes it very intense very quickly. And new relationships can feel intense because you're in that honeymoon phase, and so it can be very intense, but he kind of amps it up a notch. And so he does this thing called love bombing. And what love bombing is they're suddenly you're the only one. They start talking about marriage. We're talking about commitment very quickly. They're constantly bringing you flowers, constantly communicating with you. Like, it's for people for most people, it would feel overwhelming. But for somebody who feels like they have a hole in them, it can feel like that helps fill it. So it's a lot of romance, gets serious really quickly. They say I love you very, very quickly. The romantic relationship, it usually, these kind of relationships seem like the most romantic relationship you've ever been in. Like, they're at first. I'm going to qualify that.
At first. Yeah, they want to make it that 50 Shades of Grey.
Yes.
Yeah. Put on the heat.
Automatically. And I do an entire podcast on 50 Shades of Grey and the emotional abuse in that book.
Oh. Totally. Yeah.
So from the first meeting, they have these things called naked truths. And so he uses those to get her to be brutally honest about things, which on the surface, it seems like they're just getting to know each other and they're being honest with each other, more honest than they've been with other people. So again, this is kind of romanticized in the book, but he uses this line frequently when you watch how he uses it. He uses it to get information from her when he's angry about other guys because he's intensely jealous. So
very manipulative.
Yes, and that's not a healthy relationship, like a
No.
healthy thing. Being open and honest with somebody when you're calm is one thing, but using a thing like this, a tool like this, as a weapon when
Scare
you're
tactic.
angry,
Yeah.
yeah, because that's what he did. He made it into a weapon.
Mhm.
Yeah, and we don't want to do that. So it also allows him to demand emotional intimacy that he hasn't built. So he hasn't built the right, or not even, I wouldn't say right, he hasn't developed the relationship to the point that she feels comfortable disclosing some of these things, but he's demanding to be told this and making it part of their special thing. And it's the implication behind what he's saying is if you really love me, you're going to tell me this information
Mhm.
because this is our thing. And that's not right. Like, we
Mhm.
can't, love does not mean that I have to tell you everything, every thought I've ever had in my
Mhm.
entire life. Because some of the information he wants to know is from years and years and years and years before she met him.
Right. Does not needed to know.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
past relationships that she's had. Like, he's literally jealous of people that she's dated in the past.
Yeah. And
Right.
that's so unhealthy.
It is. It's extremely,
Very
extremely,
unhealthy.
extremely unhealthy.
Yeah.
And so he tells her right away, very bluntly, that he wants to sleep with her, like within 30 minutes. Like, he just basically tells her very, like, using very graphic wording that he wants to sleep with her.
Makes me want to puke. Sorry.
It threw me off. I'm like,
No.
yeah, that's not good. And you get the right. But it's supposed to be like she's all flattered and she's like, "Oh, he wants to be with me so bad. He was just blurted this out. He didn't do it just once. He did it again."
It's like the guy at the bar that tries to pick you up. You just want to throw your drink on him and go away. Go away.
But because he was charming and he had a handsome face, now it's romanticized. But like, let's think about it here. Like, was this respectful behavior to be within 30 minutes of meeting somebody, being like, "Oh yeah, like she just went to her dad's funeral. She's not in like a bar trying to get picked up.
Yeah,
like,
that's
this is not a Tinder match here.
This is wrong.
This is her dressed in black on a top of a rooftop, just have gone to her dad's funeral. Like, she's not in like not in a place.
No, not.
And yeah,
Red flags
flags
everywhere.
So it is so
For every woman, every man out there listening, if you see this happening, go the other way. Just back out slowly.
So the next thing he does is that he starts like confiding in her, like very intimate secrets right away. Okay, again, he's emotional intimacy that wasn't earned. So he's trying to get the like and kind, because if I share something super intimate about myself, you're going to share something super intimate about you, and now I have power over you, blah, 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 blah. That's an abuse tactic, by the way, guys.
Right.
So he does this, and so she gets this feeling immediately, because what abusive relationships want to do is they want to make you feel like you're special. You're so special.
He divulged his life story to me, so he's trying to connect with me.
Yes, I can be the one person that can make him commit. I'm chosen because he chose to be with me. He just wanted to sleep with me, but he likes me so much that he wants to be in a relationship with me. Guys, that is not ever the case. Like, ever. It is very much an abuse tactic for somebody to come along and be like, make you feel like you're special and the chosen one and all of this in order to have that power and control.
Right. If they thought you were a sex object at first, they probably still think you're a sex object. Sorry, I can't say it. Sex object, you're still just a sex object. And that was where their brain went first, and that's probably where their brain's going to stay.
Yes. Or vice versa.
Yeah.
Like, making you feel like, oh yeah, you're the only one that I want to commit to, doesn't, like, it may be a mirage. It may be I will actually commit to anybody, but I'm going to do this to make you feel special, so you're more likely to want to commit back. Because now I've made you feel like you are the only one. You are the chosen one. You are the special person.
Right. And that comes later in a relationship. First, connecting, with somebody usually starts first.
Like after you've been with somebody for a while, then absolutely you're the special one. But 10 minutes after you meet this guy, like absolutely not.
Shouldn't be that way. No.
Like no. Like,
I mean, there may be some odd. I mean, there might be other. There may be things that.
maybe some chemistry.
Yeah, but some people there may be some relationships on the outliers there, but typically that's not how it works.
Typically, that is not how it works.
Can't say all.
And I would say exercise caution.
Right.
If somebody comes in and tells you, says these kinds of things to you, then I would be like, it doesn't mean that you have to dump the whole relationship. It just
Right.
means that this person might be blowing some smoke.
Yeah, I agree. Totally.
Yeah. So, but these are like, so again, he tries to make her feel special. Like he's literally comes to her house and begs on his hands and knees for her to sleep with him. And she says no, and he continues to beg her and corner her and everything. And the whole idea again is to make her feel special and she's the only one and blah 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 blah. Again, great for a dime store romance novel, but not great for a real life relationship.
No, totally not.
So the abuser will also often confess intense feelings very quickly. So you'll have, and not everybody who does this is an abuser, but often they have some trauma or something going on in the background. So it's definitely a caution light in this situation. So you might feel pressured to commit faster than you typically would be. So you'll see people who they start dating somebody, and then a week after they start dating, somebody's talking about marriage and kids.
That's pretty quick.
Yeah.
Russian things just a tad.
Mm-hmm. And for somebody who's codependent themselves, they might feel an urge because codependent's the other half of this. And this is where Lily fits in, because she would be what we would, in popular culture terms, called codependent. So in this situation, she might feel the urge to get super serious quickly because that's kind of the dynamic she grew up with. That's what feels comfortable to her. It's also she's getting the pressure from him, that kind of thing. And she may feel like because she's special and she's chosen, that if she doesn't reciprocate that she'll miss her chance. Because she feels it usually there's a very low self-esteem associated with this.
Gotcha.
And after they'd been dating a few months, they move in together and they end up getting married in Vegas. And I would say probably 6 months after they started dating.
Had to be Vegas, didn't it?
It did, because she was afraid. Get this, because in the book, she's afraid if she doesn't go to Vegas, he'll change his mind.
Really?
Has there ever been a more codependent thing written?
Whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Well, I'm just saying, but she's afraid he'll change his mind. So she goes with Vegas with him because she wants to, again, it's that feeling of scarcity that I have to snatch. I'm lucky for him to be in my life. I'm putting up with this because I'm lucky for him to be in my life. I'm lucky for him to have, quote, quote, chosen me. Therefore, I don't want him to second guess himself.
Right.
You see what I mean by that's
Totally.
codependent?
Codependency, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And he's a neurosurgeon, and there's some power that's behind his title and all those things that get fed into the romanticized marrying a doctor and
right. And her dad was the mayor. So it doesn't have abuse doesn't always look like what we think it looks like. I mean, this kind of stuff happens in all types of households and all types of jobs and relationships and family statuses and all of that.
Yeah.
But it all comes down to that power and control. And so he making her feel like it's scarce is what gives him that power.
Right.
So then the violence typically starts with a single incident. And typically that one incident is a big shock. It's something that was totally unexpected out of the blue, just like it was in the book. They were having a scene that was set up to be kind of spicy, and then all of a sudden it just turned violent. And so you're gonna have this feeling of this was an action out of character. It was followed by a lot of regrets and apologies, and the underlying message is, I'm sorry, you made me so mad.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is after the initial explosion, this apology phase is called the makeup or honeymoon phase. And it goes right back to that love bombing like you had in the beginning. So he was going through all of that catching her phase in the beginning. And now that he's got her, he's going to, like, we have the explosion, and then now he can make up for it.
Mm-hmm. Lots of gifts, everything's perfect. Yeah, so it's kind of like that violent stage. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so this stage can feel, it goes back to that romance from the beginning, because he's got to make you want to stay. You got to feel chosen again. You got to feel special. So he's going to layer in flowers and all that romantic talk again. So in the book, Lily told Ryle at this point that if he ever hit her again, she was gone. And she accepted his apology because he was drunk. Because he was panicked, because his hands were burnt. He's a neurosurgeon. Even though she knew the cycle, she's seen it firsthand with her parents. She believed him and allowed the cycle to continue. So after the honeymoon phase is the calm down or cool down phase. And so this is when things go back to status quo, to normal. Now, every time you go through this cycle, the cool down phase gets a little worse. Your status quo is a little bit more uncomfortable.
No more flowers, no more love bombing.
That's all. Yeah, that's all done. Yeah. And this is, everything just goes back to normal.
Right.
The love bombing decreases, etc. But next we have the tension building. Okay, so remember I said that the calm down, cool down phase gets worse. It becomes more bitter and shorter. So during this tension building phase, you'll start noticing the nitpicking. The person will start getting more and more tense all the time. They'll start nitpicking. Their temper will be shorter. They'll start pulling away emotionally. And it's not uncommon to have what I call bickerments at this point. They're not really arguments. They're just more like bickering about, you put the toilet paper roll on upside down. Mm-hmm. But they'll be frequent and all the time, and there really won't be a whole lot of communication. It'll be mostly that person talking at you. Then next we get to the explosion, and that is like, this will happen again, and every explosion again will escalate a little bit further from the last one. Mm-hmm. However, if it's not, people tend to have that thought, well, at least this time he didn't
do X, Y, Z. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the book talks about how each time you think you found your limit, because typically before we get into a relationship, you say, this is the point I will never take. I will never take a relationship where he hits me. I'll never take a relationship where he calls me the B word. Mm-hmm. I will never take a relationship when blah, blah, blah. But each time, because this happens so slowly over such a long period of time, your limit keeps getting pushed higher and higher and higher. Mm-hmm. So you don't even recognize it anymore. Yeah. And eventually he hits you and you think to yourself, at least I don't have to go to the hospital this time. Like, eventually you start having that thought, like I said, at least he didn't do X, Y, or Z this time. Mm-hmm. And so now I don't want you to listen to this podcast and say, well, they haven't hit me yet, so this doesn't apply. Mm-hmm. The cycle applies to emotional abuse too, and all abuse escalates. So a relationship that's emotionally abusive today could very easily turn physically abusive tomorrow, next week, next year, whenever.
Right. Just gotta give it time.
Yeah. And just like the book started out with what seemed like a perfect romance, domestic violence relationships can feel perfect at first, and that's what makes them so hard to walk away from. Mm-hmm. Because they basically spend the rest of their life trying to get back to where it was in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Right. A lot of people, some of the domestic violence victims that I've worked with have always said, well, I just keep going back. I just keep going back. And you see that repetitively. They
Right.
just keep going back. They just keep going back.
Right.
It's
And that's
breaking the cycle.
They say it takes 7 times before a DV victim can completely leave their partner on average. So if you've got a friend or a family member that's going through this, understand that it's not always that straightforward and simple to just leave. Because there is a lot of emotional and pieces involved in this.
Yeah, there is. I worked very closely with my husband. I took in a young lady when we were, it's been probably 25 years ago, who was her mom was a victim of domestic violence. And we took in her daughter, and her daughter stayed with us for about a year. And her mom just absolutely could not leave the situation. But we kept her daughter safe. And the dad, who was the abuser, he finally went and got treatment. And it was a very successful outcome. But her mom said to my husband and I, could you please keep my daughter safe till I can get help?
Right.
And the dad finally got help. So there's success stories out there.
Right.
But she did the one best thing she could do for her daughter was to get her daughter safe.
Get her daughter out of the situation.
Get the daughter out of the situation. So domestic violence is one of those situations that's hard. It's hard making a good decision, but getting help is the first step. Recognizing.
It can be really hard on the outside because if it's somebody you care about, you're like, why can't that person just get out? Why can that person just not leave this situation? But when the person who's on the inside, for them, it's more complicated than that.
It is more complicated.
It's because it's not just about the relationship and it's easier to walk away from a healthy relationship than it is a DV relationship.
Right, exactly.
Like it 1,000 times easier because there is a element of control and you feel like you don't have control of your own life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think, for the students who are listening, the people who are listening to this, if you find yourself in an abusive relationship, there's resources here on campus. There's resources in your community, but counseling through student well-being is confidential. Student support and community standards can help with resources as well. And if your partner is a student, Title IX may apply to the situation and fit the criteria, and non-exempt staff will
are
required to report. So, but if it's your choice to participate in that process, and you can also seek off-campus resources if needed. The Russell House is a local women's shelter for domestic violence, and we'll place the link here in the podcast. So there's also a domestic violence hotline. We'll put those in the notes as well. But I think the most important thing is if you need help, don't be afraid to ask. There are people that will help you. I think that's the first key, is taking that step to get help. Don't allow yourself to be that person that just says, oh, it'll get better. He'll stop hitting me or she'll stop hitting me. Because it's not just women who are victims of domestic violence. There are men who are victims of domestic violence as well.
Absolutely.
And so know that help is available to you.
Right. Absolutely. And there's a lot of shame for men who find themselves to be victims of domestic violence because they feel like nobody's going to believe them. But it's more common than you think it is.
Absolutely.
And there is absolutely no shame in it. And there are resources, and we can help you. And the longer you stay in it, the harder it becomes to cut those ties. Because again, the goal is to get you to commit as much as possible, as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. Miners, it's always a pleasure being here with you. And if you need help, we're here.
And we'll see you next week.
Take care.
For more information about mental health and wellness, contact Student Wellbeing at 204 Norwood Hall. And you can also give us a call at 573-341-4211.
The song Happy Days is brought to us by music from www.free-stock-music.com. You can also add and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook using our handle @S&T Wellbeing.